Welcome to Crimson Legacy Historians, where the past is not just remembered, but brought back to life with depth and clarity. Picture this. An Athenian councillor named Lycidas rises to speak inside a packed assembly hall on the island of Salamis. He raises his hand and calmly offers a rational suggestion. Perhaps we should at least hear the Persian peace offer. No one boos, no one argues. Instead, the other councillors close in around him and stone him to death right there on the floor of the debate chamber. But it doesn't stop with him. When word spreads through Athens, the city's women storm Lycidas's home. They drag his wife and children into the street and stone them to death as well. This isn't a horror story. This is 479 BC. Diplomacy was over. The Greeks were traumatized, displaced, and consumed by rage. The 300 Spartans at Thermopylae were dead. Athens lay in ashes. Words had failed. Only violence remained. This is the emotional furnace that leads us to the Battle of Plataea, the moment when the Greeks stopped being hunted and became executioners. Before we dive deeper into these brutal, often forgotten stories of survival, sacrifice, and revenge, if uncovering the darker truths of history interests you, consider liking this video and subscribing. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It still amazes me that these ancient stories connect us across continents and centuries. The murder of Lycidas revealed one undeniable truth: Greece was desperate. King Xerxes had returned to Persia, but the war hadn't left with him. He entrusted Greece to General Mardonius, a man far more dangerous than his king. Mardonius wasn't a showman, he was a predator. He camped in the plains of Boeotia with an army of nearly 300,000 elite soldiers holding Greece by the throat. To make his message unmistakable, he burned Athens a second time, leaving nothing standing. "I am still here." The Athenians, now homeless refugees, snapped. They sent messengers to Sparta, not begging for help, but issuing a threat. "March now," they said, "or Athens will ally with Persia. And if that happens, Spartan walls won't save Sparta." It was the wake-up call of the century. The Spartans had hidden behind the Isthmus of Corinth, hoping the storm would pass. Now, with annihilation staring them in the face, the Spartan war machine finally roared to life. And when Sparta moves, the earth moves with it. In a single night, the Ephors issued an unprecedented mobilization order. They didn't send a token force. They emptied the city. 5,000 Spartiates, the elite core of Spartan society, armed themselves. And then came the detail that reveals just how serious this was. They brought the slaves. For every Spartan warrior, 7 helot servants were armed and forced to march. 35,000 enslaved men, alongside 5,000 Spartan elites, joined by another 5,000 allied troops. By dawn, a column of 45,000 men had vanished northward. When the Athenian envoys arrived the next morning, furious and demanding action, the Ephors simply glanced at the sun and replied, "You can stop shouting. The army is already at the border. The hunt has begun." As Spartan dust clouds rolled north, General Mardonius was already moving. And here we need to correct one of history's biggest lies. The Persians were not a mindless horde. The force Mardonius commanded was not the bloated parade army Xerxes had marched into Greece. He had dismissed the conscripts. What remained was a lean, professional killing machine. Immortals, veterans who had shattered Spartan lines at Thermopylae, succor horse archers from Central Asia, capable of hitting armor gaps at full gallop. Cavalry, mobility, flexibility. This was a modern army, centuries ahead of its enemies. When scouts reported the Spartans had finally left the Peloponnese, Mardonius smiled. This was exactly what he wanted. He knew better than to fight hoplites in city streets. That would be suicide. He needed open ground. So he evacuated Athens, after ordering it completely destroyed. Every wall, every house, every surviving temple reduced to rubble. A scorched earth message meant to break Greek morale before the battle even began. Then Mardonius withdrew north into Boeotia, near Plataea. Not a retreat, a trap. He positioned his army along the Asopus River, on flat plains perfect for cavalry warfare. Greek phalanxes were unstoppable walls of bronze, but they turned slowly. On open ground, Persian cavalry could surround them, harass them, and bleed them dry. Mardonius even built a massive fortified stockade, a city of war in the field, and waited, and the Greeks almost walked straight into it. The allied Greek army, now swelling with forces from every city-state that hadn't submitted to Persia, reached the foothills of Mount Cithaeron. From there, they stared down at a sea of Persian tents, glittering armor, and grazing cavalry. Led by the Spartan regent Pausanias, they made the only intelligent decision possible. They stopped. They refused to descend onto the plain. Instead, they clung to the rocky slopes where Persian horses couldn't reach them. What followed was a deadly staring contest. Mardonius in the valley, Pausanias on the ridge. Days passed. Impatient, Mardonius sent his cavalry commander Mecistius forward, a towering figure beloved by the army, riding a Nicaean stallion with a bridle of solid gold. His riders harassed the Greeks relentlessly, circling, mocking, raining arrows. They taunted the Spartans for hiding in the hills. Greek allies began to break. When the Megarians sent a desperate plea for help, 300 Athenians stepped forward, a haunting echo of Thermopylae. In the chaos that followed, fate intervened. An arrow struck Mecistius's horse. Thrown to the ground, the Persian commander fought like a living fortress. Greek blades bounced off his hidden scale armor until one soldier drove a spear through the eye slit of his helmet. Mecistius fell. The Persians charged wildly to recover his body. The Greeks held firm. For the first time, Persian blood soaked the field, but Pausanias knew this was only the beginning, because Mardonius was watching, and he was no longer smiling. Amompharetus slammed the stone at Pausanias's feet. The impact echoed like a drumbeat across the valley. Pointing at it, he shouted, "With this pebble, I cast my vote not to flee from the strangers." In Sparta, votes were cast with pebbles. Amompharetus was mocking the system, using a boulder to vote for death. While this absurd internal war played out, the Athenians on the left wing waited in confusion. They knew the Spartans were meant to move first, but nothing was happening. As dawn crept closer, they sent a runner to the Spartan camp. What he found was chaos. Commanders shouting, soldiers frozen, pride battling survival. The messenger awkwardly asked the obvious question, "The sun is coming up. Are we moving or not?" Pausanias, exhausted and furious, made the hardest decision of his life. He left Amompharetus behind. He ordered the main Spartan force to begin the retreat, gambling that once Amompharetus saw himself abandoned, pride would give way to instinct. It was a game of chicken played with an army. The Spartans marched south slowly, constantly glancing back, and, finally, Amompharetus broke. Realizing he truly faced the entire Persian host alone, he ordered his men forward. But it was too late. The sky was turning grey. Birds began to sing. The sun crested the mountains. Across the river, Persian sentries rubbed sleep from their eyes and froze. The Greek center was gone. The Athenians were miles away, hidden behind hills, and on the ridges stood the Spartans, strung out, disorganized, with Amompharetus's unit trailing behind like a wounded limb. General Mardonius stepped from his tent and stared at the scene. He didn't see a tactical maneuver. He saw a rout. Laughing, he mocked the legend of Sparta. "Are these the men who never run? Look at them." He didn't wait for perfect formations. He didn't bother with careful planning. He pointed at the red cloaks and shouted, "Get them!" The Persian cavalry surged forward, thundering across the river. Behind them came the immortals and infantry. No order, no formation, just a roaring avalanche of hunters chasing prey. Pausanias heard it before he saw it. A distant rumble, then a roar. He turned and saw the horizon swallowed by dust. He looked at his scattered column. He looked toward the Athenians, too far away to help. He looked back toward Plataea, where allies hid behind walls. He was alone, 10,000 Spartans, 35,000 helots, against the Persian Empire. The Battle of Plataea had begun. Mardonius didn't send his infantry forward for a fair fight. He was smarter than that. Instead, he ordered tens of thousands of archers to plant their wicker shields and darken the sky. This is where Plataea becomes horror. The Spartans and Tegians, around 53,000 men, were caught mid-march on open slopes. Cavalry harassed their flanks, while arrows rained down endlessly. The instinct was to run or charge. Pausanias ordered neither. He commanded the army to halt and kneel. Then, as men screamed and arrows slammed into bronze, Pausanias turned his back on the enemy and called for a priest. A sacrifice was required. A goat was dragged forward. Its throat was cut. The liver was examined. Bad omens. So Pausanias waited. Imagine standing there, crouched behind your shield, listening to arrows punch through armor, hearing men die beside you, while your general studies entrails and shakes his head. Behind the Spartans stood the Helots. No bronze armor, no heavy shields, slaves dying just as brutally for masters who owned them. For them, this wasn't discipline, it was madness. One of the first to fall was Calliades, the most beautiful man in the Greek army. An arrow struck him before the battle even truly began. As he died, he didn't complain of pain. He said only this: "I do not mind dying for Greece. I mind dying without having struck a blow." Another goat, another bad omen. The Persian infantry edged closer, shouting insults, firing at point-blank range. The Tegeans began to break, ready to charge without orders. Pausanias stopped them. He looked toward the distant temple of Hera, tears streaking his face, and screamed a prayer, begging the gods not to let Greece die in shame. Finally, the third sacrifice, the omens changed. Pausanias rose. He raised his spear. That was all. The statues came to life. The Spartan phalanx exploded forward. What followed was not swordplay, it was physics. Bronze crushed wicker. The Persian shield wall disintegrated instantly. Men were lifted off their feet and trampled. The orthismos began, the shove. Persians fought with incredible bravery, grabbing spears with bare hands, snapping shafts, stabbing desperately. But courage couldn't defeat armor. When Spartans struck, bone broke. Spears shattered, swords came out. The Xiphos did its work. The Helots surged forward, finishing. The wounded. Dust swallowed the battlefield. Screams merged into a single endless roar. At the center rode Mardonius, on a white horse, surrounded by his elite guard. As long as he stood, the Persians fought. The Spartans saw him, and they began to hunt. The phalanx ground forward, ignoring gold, ignoring treasure, focused on the man who burned Athens. The guard fell one by one. Then came Arimnestos. The blow was fatal. Whether stone or spear, it crushed Mardonius from his saddle into the dirt of Boeotia. He never rose. The sound of battle changed instantly. The Persian army broke. Artabazus, commanding 40,000 reserves, watched from afar and chose survival. He turned his army around and marched out of Greece, abandoning the rest to die. What followed was not a retreat. It was a slaughter. The Persians fled into their own stockade, trapping themselves. Spartans struggled to breach it, until the Athenians arrived and tore the walls down. Inside there was no mercy, no prisoners, no surrender. By nightfall, an empire lay dead in the dust. When silence finally fell, the Greeks realized they stood atop unimaginable wealth. Mardonius's camp was a palace of gold and silk. Pausanias ordered 2 meals prepared, 1 Persian feast, 1 Spartan broth. He laughed and said, "Look how this man lived, and yet he came to rob us, who have so little." But history would remember the irony, because standing there, surrounded by gold, something inside Pausanias broke. Plataea saved Greece, but it planted the seed of Pausanias' downfall. It was almost impossible to believe. This was Pausanias, the regent of Sparta, the man who had avenged Leonidas, the commander who shattered the Persian Empire, and now he was dressing like the enemy he had destroyed, speaking like them, living like them. Whispers turned into rumors, rumors hardened into fear. Word spread that Pausanias was secretly corresponding with Xerxes himself, offering nothing less than all of Greece in exchange for marriage into the Persian royal family. The savior of Western civilization, people said, had become its betrayer. Sparta was alarmed. The ephors recalled him home and placed him on trial. But Pausanias walked free. There was no undeniable proof, and his royal blood still carried weight. Officially, he was innocent. Unofficially, no one trusted him anymore. And Pausanias didn't stop. According to later accounts, he began meeting with the Helots, the very slaves who had bled beside him at Plataea. He promised them freedom if they helped him overthrow the Spartan state. To a Spartan, conspiring with Persia was unforgivable. But conspiring with Helots, that was existential treason. Sparta needed proof. So they set a trap. A servant was hidden behind a partition while Pausanias spoke freely, outlining his plans, his ambitions, his belief that he was above Spartan law. When the servant emerged, the ephors finally had what they needed. The most famous general in the Greek world became a hunted man in his own city. Pausanias was not defeated by Persian steel or cavalry charges. He was defeated by himself. His ego, inflated by victory, poisoned him more thoroughly than any enemy ever could. As the ephors moved to arrest him, Pausanias fled, not to an army, not to allies, but to a temple. He ran through the streets of Sparta and burst into the temple of Athena of the Brazen House, claiming sanctuary. Under ancient law, no one could kill a man within a sacred space without offending the gods. The ephors stopped at the threshold. They were trapped by their own traditions, so they chose a solution that could only come from Sparta. If they could not touch him, they would simply make sure he never left. They ordered the temple doors sealed with stone, and then came the moment that history never forgot. As the stones were gathered, an elderly woman stepped forward. It was Pausanias' mother. She said nothing. She didn't beg. She didn't hesitate. She lifted a stone and placed it at the temple entrance. Then she walked away. In that silent act, she chose Sparta over her son. For days, Pausanias lay inside the darkened temple. No food, no water, only the smell of incense and the sound of his own breathing. The hero of Plataea died slowly, not as a warrior, but as a prisoner. Just before his heart stopped, the ephors dragged his emaciated body outside. They would not allow him to die within the sanctuary and pollute it. Pausanias died disgraced, a traitor, a warning, and this is why we don't celebrate Plataea the way we celebrate Thermopylae. Thermopylae is simple, clean. The 300 die young, beautiful, noble, uncorrupted. Leonidas becomes eternal because he never lived long enough to fall. Plataea is different. At Plataea, the hero survives and rots. The victors commit atrocities. The salvation of Greece leads to greed, empire, and betrayal. We prefer beautiful defeats to ugly victories, but history does not care about comfort. Thermopylae was a symbol. Plataea was salvation. On those blood-soaked plains, 10,000 Spartans and their allies stared at the end of their world and refused to blink. The why proved that free people fighting for their laws could shatter a global superpower. It was brutal, it was savage, and it was necessary.